Hello there, I'm Jeremy and welcome back to Freeform Star Wars. Now it's a little more timely this week, it's Monday, so hey, that's great. And so it's time to talk about the 13th episode of The Bad Batch, Infested. So here we go, brief recap. When the crew got back to Ord Mantell from a successful mission after the last time we saw them, they found out that Roland Durand had kicked Sid out and taken over. This led to the crew getting a mission from Sid to sabotage Roland by secretly stealing a shipment of spice that he owed to the Pikes. Now their mission was almost successful right off the bat, but the buffoons who Sid sent to go kidnap Ruby as a distraction failed, which led to everything else falling apart as the crew was chased into the mine tunnel where the Earlings were woken up and the spice fell down into the cave. And things got worse when the Pikes held both Roland and them all responsible for this loss of spice. So back off to go get the spice. Now, after receiving the spice at the end of the episode, the Pikes closed out things by letting the Bad Batch go, and as for Roland though, it looked like he was in a lot more trouble until Omega stood up for him, perhaps persuaded a little by how much Ruby loved Roland. And after that, the Pikes opted only to cut off one of his horns, which looks like it might have been what they were about to do anyway, but certainly, given the situation, it didn't look like that might have been all it was. So anyway, that was the episode. Biggest surprise really for me in this episode was, well, given the penchant for Filoni to love his tie-ins, I figured for sure that our villain of the week, the Deveronian we saw there, would be a young Vizago from Rebels. But the horn that was cut off in this episode was actually on the opposite side from Vizago's, so probably not. Now, in fairness, it is still possible that Roland Durand and Vizago are one and the same, changes names later. Maybe the horn grows back eventually and the other one got cut off at some other point. Sure, it's possible. That's not the implication we're set up here in Bad Batch by purposely cutting off the opposite horn. And honestly, I'm happy to be surprised here. It's a giant galaxy and it feels bigger when we meet new characters rather than always running into the same ones. Alright, highlights for this episode. Number 4 would be the minecart chase. It was fun over in there, dealing with the Earlings popping up. Has even popped up during the live streams and comments about some Temple of Doom references with the minecarts in there. Yeah, I feel a little of that. Number 3 was seeing the Pikes. Nice to see them pop up. They are a major force within the Star Wars galaxy. And so just a little reminder of that, and I'm sure we will see them again sometime. Number 2 would be Wrecker. Wrecker got a big part in here. I mean, he's always definitely got a significant size in the roles, but considering his issue with heights, we played on that a fair bit, including him actually being one of the 2 people we sent down to go get the crates of spice at the end, which, rappelling down those lines all the way there, yeah, fun stuff. But as a kind of necessary as he is the big one who's most easily going to go ahead and grab those crates anyway, so what else can you do? And number 1 highlight would be Ruby. Now, amusingly, watching the episode, I didn't exactly remember that we'd seen Ruby before. Now, it's been a month and a half, actually, because back in episode 7, Battle Scars, at the very beginning of the episode, we watched the Bad Batch coming back from a mission. And they're up in their ship, and we don't see Ruby very much in here, and what we do see is pretty dark, and it's a very frightened Ruby. So there's another reason might not be as memorable. But anyway, their mission actually had been to go steal Ruby from a Rokai gang that had actually themselves stolen Ruby, and they were bringing the lizard back to Sid, who had a client she was giving it to, which, as we find out here in this episode, that client was Roland Durand, from who it looks like the Rokai went ahead and stole Ruby from in the first place. Oh, bonus point, the name Ruby? Well, the name Ruby was one that Omega gave to the lizard over in that beginning of episode 7, so all kinds of good stuff there. But as for this episode, so first off, let me say it's a nice level of detail for something that looked like a quick throwaway from the beginning of a different episode. But more than that, Ruby looks like a great pet. Very much a happy little dog, shall we say, and super colorful now that we can really see her in the light instead of just the kind of dark gloom of the ship. And I admit I'd love to see Ruby again. Okay, so this episode, ultimately I do have to admit that this episode was actually a bit of a letdown for me. It was very straightforward and felt very fillery, at least as filler as I think Bad Batch will really get. We didn't really have any character development in any meaningful way here, and no real overall plot development, I don't think. But as filler as something like this is, I say because I imagine certain things will come back in. We'll probably see the Pikes come back in, say in a future season. I imagine Roland will come back in, and this was introduction to him as a character. Heck, this already brought Ruby back in. And I'm also going to make a theory that the Earlings that we saw in that cave are going to come back. maybe even later this same season, because they seem as like a perfect opportunity for an ambush plan for someone who might be pursuing the Bad Batch. Say if Crosshair follows them toward Mantell, for instance. That's why I say as fillery as it gets, because I imagine these elements will come back, and if you didn't have this background, they wouldn't mean as much to you necessarily when they pop back in a future season or later this season, depending on when they pop back up. But still, yeah, a little bit of letdown, probably the weakest episode of the entire season so far. Nevertheless, while I may say it's the weakest episode of the season, it was mediocre, but it was enjoyable. And I do expect to see some pieces come back in the future, and that'll probably raise the value of this episode a little bit in my head when they do come back, and I care a little more about characters like Roland. Hey, if that's the worst we got for the season, I guess I'm really not complaining when it comes to it. Say, on that note, well, what about you? What were your favorite moments from the 13th episode? And do you look forward to seeing Roland and Ruby again in the future? Let me know down below in the comments. And let me also give a quick thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who help support the channel. If you're interested in helping support as well, there's a link down below in the description. And to all of you, thank you so much for watching. Really helps out if you give the video a like, a share, and don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you back here next time for another new episode of Freeform Star Wars. Have a magical day, and may the Force be with you. Always.